We don't know where they came from. One day they just sort of fell from the sky. At first we thought it was a good idea to approach them, but then all of our men started dying, one by one. Okay, now, dramatic intro aside, I actually think it doesn't look alien enough. I feel like they should have gone way further with the alien aesthetic. Maybe given it some tentacles and... No, that's gone hentai pretty quickly. But before we get into that, today's video is sponsored by Be Quiet's majestic light-based 600LX. The 600LX looks great standing up or lay it down for some sexy retro futurist action. And with its 4 pre-installed fans and support for up to 2 360mm radiators at a time, the light-based 600LX can handle even the highest thermal loads, all while gently but firmly deleting all the sag from your GPU. So get yourself Be Quiet's spectacular light-based 600LX using the link down below. So what is this graphics card? Well, it's a collaboration between Yeston of Waifu graphics card fame and the peripheral maker Gravistar. My first interaction with a Gravistar product was with this wild-looking Bluetooth speaker crab alien thing. They then branched out into making peripherals like this Mercury keyboard, which is actually a surprisingly solid keyboard despite looking like it was designed for a 14-year-old Fortnite addict. Same goes for their gaming mice. Their wild looks aren't their only selling point, they're also spec'd up the wazoo. Specs which you very much pay for. So when Yeston reached out saying they wanted to send over this graphics card they made with Gravistar, their collaboration immediately made sense to me. And besides, in my opinion, the alien aesthetic wins over the waifu aesthetic any day. Now the card in question is an RX 9070 XT, and it seems like a real beefy variant. It has a massive triple fan cooler design on it, 3 8-pin power connectors which I very much prefer to the 12-pin Arson connector, and maybe the best looking backplate I've seen on a GPU. It is thick metal with this contour line aesthetic. It really looks amazing. And I like the cutouts that give you access to the BIOS switch and allow you to turn the LEDs off. Although having said that, why the hell is there an RGB connector dangling off this thing? What is this, 2016? Especially considering its butthole puckering $900 US asking price. That is well over $100 more than other high-end 9070 XT variants. So with that, let's whip off its cooler to see how it even attempts to justify that asking price, aside from the fact that it does admittedly look really sick. Oh, they have the old little sticker, which I have no idea what that means. The teardown was real straightforward. There were just 10 screws holding the cooler on, including the 2 screws on the rear I/O. Oh, there we go. There we go. Oh, this cooler is a chunky boy. We've got 7 heat pipes carrying heat from the vapor chamber contact plate, fancy, into the massive fin stack. Now, I don't know if it's the vapor chamber or what, but this cooler is insanely effective. We'll see in the testing later. It is a powerful cooler. But I guess it makes sense looking at the cooler, because you know what they say, there's no replacement for displacement. And here is our white PCB, which is pretty rare for graphics cards, although it doesn't functionally really change anything. And I actually don't think it quite matches the rest of the graphics card. It would have been cool if they made it like purple or something. I think that would have worked a bit better, but still, nice. There's also hella power delivery. It's not the craziest I've seen, but it should be able to reasonably power like a medium-sized Mediterranean island. Then here are our little switches. This is the BIOS and the LED switch. 3 8-pin connectors, which is awesome. I'm really glad that they didn't go with that 12-pin abomination. This is a clunkier implementation, but I think at this point it's more reliable. And then I think these look like either pads for extra fan headers or maybe even RGB, which makes it a bit weird that we have the little dangly bit. Although the dangly bit doesn't come straight off the PCB. I think it actually feeds off of this connector into the cooler and then runs out to the 3-pin RGB header, which is just such a backwards implementation for such a high-end card. I really don't know why they did that. But with that, let's go back into the past, drop this graphics card into a system and see how it performs. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I was expecting more of it to light up, but I kind of like that more of it doesn't light up, to be honest. And the system I'm testing it in has an Intel 13900KF and 32 gigs of DDR5 running at 6000 MHz. Now I'm starting with CS2 at 1440p low settings, just to show how necessary one of these graphics cards is for esports gaming. And as you can tell, despite having our Herculean CPU in here, our graphics card basically isn't doing anything, and we're still getting well over 300 frames per second. Now with CS2, we might get a higher frame rate with like a 9800X3D because the game does really like those CPUs, but still, the point stands, if you're playing CS2, you might as well just use your graphing calculator. Now with Cyberpunk, I tested at ultra settings, both 1440p and 4K. We'll talk about the 4K results in a second, but first, look at the power draw. We're getting about 300 watts here, and with the game running for a while, the temperatures topped out at 58 degrees Celsius, which is wild. And that's with the fans barely making any noise. This cooler is a beast. And then after testing with the standard BIOS, I flipped the BIOS switch to see what it would do. It turns out we get an extra 30-ish watts of power draw and a slightly higher core frequency, which again did not phase the cooler at all. Now in terms of performance, that extra power draw doesn't really lead to much. We do gain a couple frames here and there, but it's nothing crazy. At which point I decided to try some manual overclocking with all this newfound power draw. Initially, I just clicked on the overclock GPU button in the AMD drivers, which said it gave us a plus 103 MHz offset, which suddenly massively ramped up our performance with 0.8 of a frame per second. This tiny improvement left me wildly unsatisfied, so I decided to take things into my own hands. Initially, I just slid the max frequency offset slider higher than AMD told me they slid it, which actually led to a lower core frequency during the test and erased our massive 0.8 frame per second gain. But then I remembered that that isn't how you overclock the 9070 series. Instead of playing with the frequency offset slider, you reduce the voltage offset. So I initially tried -50, which massively increased our performance gain over the AMD auto overclock. Instead of gaining 0.8 frames per second, we gained 1.4 frames per second. I then kept increasing the offset in steps of 50 until the graphics card crashed, which happened at a -200 offset. However, the graphics card felt very stable with a -150 offset and a slight overclock on the memory, which pushed our core frequency to almost 3.3 GHz, which is awesome. And we went from our base 64 frames per second at 4K Ultra to 68 frames per second. Hell yeah. Although in all fairness, it is almost a 10% jump at 4K, which isn't too bad. Next, I fired up some Doom the Dark Ages running at 1440p Ultra. Now this is with the more aggressive BIOS, but without the overclock, and the game was running smooth as silk. With the Dark Ages, once you get above 100 frames per second, because of how the engine frame paces and stuff, it feels really good. Our 1% lows hit 89, so the dips are really manageable. And yeah, generally the game feels like it's running at a way higher frame rate than it's actually running at, which might be a bit of a problem for the next game I tested. Now, I was really hoping that this crazy version of the 9070 XT was going to be able to comfortably play Stalker 2 at 1440p high settings, and we're getting in the high 80s, which seems pretty good, but the game doesn't feel that great even at like 88 frames per second, and a frame time graph that looks real stable. Now granted, I did test this right after I played Doom the Dark Ages, which did feel amazingly smooth, and maybe that comparison does make Stalker feel worse, but this game is tough on graphics cards. Interestingly, our 13900KF handled it pretty well because there was no frame rate difference between the town bit with a lot of NPCs in it and outside in the wilderness, which is some pretty rare CPU performance for Stalker 2. So with that, what did we learn in today's video? Well, if you're a tech oligarch, there is a version of the 9070 XT that kind of looks alien-y. Very nice. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the video, and until the next one, bye-bye.